Hi, I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Brett Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be with you as always.
Let's talk about rentership, because across Canada, it's growing at a much faster pace than homeownership, triple the rate, in fact, according to a new report from RBC. Brett, as a renter in Toronto, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a pretty concerning trend, and what's really happening behind the scenes is that there are now millions of Canadians who are locked out of the housing market, and that's how severe the housing crisis has begun, that they really only have one option when it comes to putting a roof over their head, and that is renting. So I'm sure that's a lot of what we're seeing.
Now, I know I often refer to you as, our in-house millennial expert and millennial that we go to for all things millennial. I think it's interesting, and it would be easy to dismiss this as a kind of millennial trend, some people painting it as, that failure to launch phenomenon, which isn't very kind. But it's interesting to note that people between the ages of 26 and 41 are certainly contributing to this trend. But the fastest growing group of renters are boomers. I was pretty surprised by that, presumably downsizing, many of them. I think this also speaks to how unaffordable but profitable for many this housing market is and is becoming.
Absolutely. If you were lucky enough to get into the housing market earlier on in life, you now have an incredible opportunity, a life-changing opportunity to generate real wealth for yourself by putting that house on the market. So I think that's what's happening there. But it's actually contributing to a pretty vicious cycle, which is that these boomers are now putting their houses up and they're selling them and they're downsizing. And then what are they doing? Well, they're helping their kids buy houses. And so if you don't have access to that type of wealth that's being generated from previous house owners, homeowners, then you're really in a tough spot.
Yeah, there's a real timing element to this, and I recognize my privilege as being among the 2/3 of Canadians who are homeowners, and so much of that has to do with timing. So I do feel for the people who are still trying to get into the market, waiting and saying, is it affordable yet? And seeing rates doing what they're doing and home prices taking a slightly different direction, but maybe not as affordable as they would like to see. Let's move on to the second topic. Let's talk about Apple's decision to introduce advanced security features. This is a way to encrypt iCloud backups. This allows users to better protect photos and notes that are stored in the cloud and the iCloud. Brett, your thoughts on this?
This is part of Apple's bigger shift towards privacy as a main focus for their various products. We first saw inklings of this when they forced apps to now ask if they have your permission for them to track your behavior in that application. This was used by apps like Facebook and Instagram to serve you better, more targeted ads. But Apple has now put in place a requirement that they ask you whether or not they have your permission. I think it's a great step forward. Your data belongs to you, and it should be as secure as possible. And so it's great to see that Apple's stepping up to protect that.
I want to riff on that as secure as possible thing that you brought up. Now, this feature is designed for users who are often targets online, and in that group, journalists, celebrities, politicians. My hope is this is part of this kind of larger effort to recognize and acknowledge that hack attacks are very real, potentially damaging threat to what we have stored on our devices, which are frankly all the most important, personal, sensitive things, whether we're talking about precious photos or videos or digital assets like cryptocurrency. In some ways, though, Brett, isn't this a reminder that where you store these items from our digital lives, it really matters, and it's worth thinking about?
Absolutely. It's really worth thinking about, and it's very important. And we've seen time and time again these big hacks happen where usually it's celebrities, important business people who have suffered the consequence of it. Jeff Bezos himself had his marriage ruined based on leaked, hacked texts. And so it's a very important thing to consider. And I think everybody should pay a bit more attention to where exactly their data is to ensure it's as safe as possible.
Absolutely, and I totally get it. Oftentimes we will trade off some security features for convenience, but remember what's at stake here, folks. The final story for this week, Brett, that I want to get into with you is women's pro soccer is coming to Canada. It is slated to feature 8 teams set to launch in 2025. This is a first for our country. First of all, Brett, do you call it soccer or do you call it football? And what do you think of these plans?
Well, I call it soccer, and I was born and raised in Canada, and I don't want to cosplay as a European, but I think it's great. Canada's one of the most successful women's soccer nations in the world, and we're the only one that doesn't have a domestic league. And right now, what that forces really talented women players to do is to go to Europe and elsewhere, and then we lose that talent, or we don't get to develop that talent in the same way that we want. You can attribute a lot of the success of the men's national team to now having a robust MLS North American Soccer League, which has been able to capture a lot of the Canadian players and get them up to a level where they can actually compete on the world stage. So I think it's a really great step forward.
I like to think of myself as a citizen of the world, so sometimes I call it soccer and sometimes I will refer to it as football. As a business reporter, I will say I've had the pleasure of very rarely covering sports. Sorry, sports fans. They're just not my forte. They're not what I'm particularly interested in. And don't get me wrong, I will gladly attend a sporting event with the right food, the beverages, and the right company to distract me. But there are some sports that I get sucked into, I will admit that. Volleyball, soccer is right up there, maybe snowboarding. Those are the ones that really capture my attention. I would like to say I'm personally excited about this because it's women, because it's soccer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great step forward. It's going to be very entertaining. And, most importantly to me is they release they release what ticket prices might look like, and they're very affordable, which is nice to see. And I hope it makes the sport way more accessible and inspires lots of other young women to get into it and then also compete at the highest levels.
Really good point about the affordability aspect of those tickets. Thank you so much, as always, for your insight and your time, Brett.
Thanks, Anne.
And have yourself a great rest of your weekend. And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily podcasts, available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.